Alright, welcome to Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, we're going to be taking a look at 5 different games from the Vaganyan Gambit, which is named after the Armenian Grandmaster, Rafael Vaganyan. He was a sharp, innovative player, and one of the reasons why this opening is named after him is because he was pretty much the pioneer of this variation for white. So, having said that, let's take a look at this first position here. I mentioned in the introduction, my style is going to be introducing the position, showing you what my opponent played, and then letting you pause the video and try to solve the tactic. After that, we will go through the game together. I think that's a little bit more fun, so you can kind of get the taste of the position right away. So we have a position here where my opponent with black has been quite strongly outplayed in the opening. Doesn't have a lot of counterplay, can't get the thematic move b5 in here, and the pieces are looking cramped. So in this position, my opponent played the move knight g4, which makes a lot of sense. The bishop and the queen now target the knight on g5. So, at this point, I would like you to pause your video and try to figure out what white played, because I'm about to explain exactly what happens. So, in this position, obviously my knight on g5 is under attack. I pretty much have a couple of choices. I can protect it with my h-pawn by playing something like h4, or I can move it back to h3. Neither one of those things appealed to me. Instead, I launched in with knight to e6. This move is definitely in white's favor here. Black is not castled, the king is stuck in the center, and although my opponent can play the move f takes e6, which is what he did, I mean, if he doesn't play f takes e6, the knight is going to cause a lot of trouble, and it's probably going to take on g7 next, assuming my opponent saw that it was attacking his queen, and since he was 2200, I think that he did. So f takes e6, f takes e6. Of course, there is already the devastating threat of mate in 1, right, on f7, and if he gets rid of my e6 pawn with something like bishop takes e6, well, then I take, he plays maybe knight takes, but after queen f7, or maybe a move like bishop c4, obviously the position is very bad for black. So he did not get involved in this, instead he went back, knight f6, and I continued piling on the pressure. But what even got me to this point where I could play the move knight e6? That's kind of the thing I'm going to be introducing and constantly explaining in this course, because it's one thing to kind of be prompted with tactics. You know, I set up a position, I say white to play. It's another thing to be able to maneuver through these opening positions and these opening moves and actually land yourself in a position where, without any sort of prompting, you can feel that there are tactics. I was looking at the move knight e6 for a while, and finally I got a chance to play it, and black's position crumbled. So, let's back up a little bit. We have d4, knight f6, bishop g5, the Trompowsky. c5, d5, queen b6. This is the beginning of the Vaganyan Gambit. Instead of defending the pawn on b2, white plays knight c3, queen b2, and comes back with the bishop. And this move might look weird, but the fact that you've committed 2 tempi in the opening is actually not so bad, because now this queen is in an awkward situation on b2, usually has to retreat back to b6, in fact pretty much always does, and white gets to immediately start launching e4 and f4 up the board. Excuse me. So queen b6, e4. In the next 4 games, I'm going to kind of just breeze through this opening because, like other authors of the series have mentioned, and I mentioned in the introduction, it's not really a repertoire course. If you want to take a look at the repertoire options yourself, you have ChessBase, ChessDB, other methods of doing so. I will touch on it briefly, but mainly we're looking at the tactics. So, e5, f4, d6, f5. This is not the most common way of playing this position, but I had studied the move f5 in a publication and a book, so just kind of trying to take some space here. h5. Now, this move is obviously very clear. My opponent did not want me expanding with my pawn going to g4 and then maybe to g5. So, in the Vaganyan Gambit, you get a lot of positions where white has given up the b2 pawn, but just has a ton of space. Like the center is being overrun by the pawns, which makes it much easier to play, because if anything, losing the b2 pawn is only a liability for black. Or, I should say, gaining the b2 pawn is only a liability for black, because white can play something like rook b1 and instantly has pressure down the b file. So it's kind of like a grab and go. It's a risk, and if you play it aggressively enough, it can very much pay off. So, let's see, h5. How did I handle the position? I immediately started to play aggressive moves based on the moves that my opponent was making. Let me explain what that means. The move h5, right, takes away the move g4, but greatly weakens the dark squares. My opponent has pushed the pawn 2 squares, which means that some of these dark squares are money, right? So I play knight f3, bishop e7, and I even spent the tempo on a move here, knight g5. I don't have to develop anything else, but I'm already eyeing the possibility of jumping into this devastating square because he can't really kick me out of g5. Luckily, pawns can't go backwards, as Sam Shanklin points out, who actually has a Grunfeld series, I believe, in the 80-20 tactics multiplier. a6, a4. In the Vaganyan gambit, you usually always answer the move a6 with a4 to prevent your opponent at some point from playing the move b5. So, knight bd7. At this point, I have a choice of moves. I can move my light squared bishop, my queen, my rook to b1. I chose queen f3. I thought that was an aggressive and powerful move. Queen c7, common idea to drop the queen back. Folks usually decide whether they do c7 or d8. Let's keep developing. Our position is not quite ready to play knight e6 yet. So, bishop e2, just a simple developing move preparing castling. Rook b8, what does the opponent want? They want to play b5. Rook b1, so we just totally clamp down on b5. c4, this is a very common idea in the Benoni and in the Vaganyan gambit. You try to push this pawn so you can free up the c5 square for your knight, and then that way you can untangle. But c4 is a target. Rook b4. I mean, there is no reason I shouldn't play that move. My opponent gave me a target. Knight c5, rook takes c4. So now my opponent has given me the pawn back and is kind of trying to counterbalance that with getting the pieces developed, bishop d7, but just castles, right? Now my opponent in this position spent one more move, queen d8, obviously eyeing the knight on g5. And here I thought, well, b5 is looking quite likely here, right? My opponent, if given the chance, can play the move b5, and so I shut it down. And now, our case of deja vu, our first of it. We're going to have a lot of those. Knight g4, and in this position, knight e6. A crushing move. F takes e6, F takes e6. What even facilitates this for white? Why is white ready for this? Because literally, if you go back to this position, all of white's pieces except 3 pawns have moved. All pieces except 3 pawns. Black has not moved a pawn. It looks like the queen hasn't moved, even though it's moved almost, how many times? b6, b2, b6, c7. The queen has moved 5 times. It's move 18. And the black queen is on its home square despite moving 5 times. That's crazy. The king on e8 hasn't moved. Rook on h8 hasn't moved. Excuse me. Knight e6. White is fully developed and ready to go. fe, fe, knight f6. Now what's important here is not necessarily following my exact moves, right? There's a chance you never even get a position like this. But let's continue to play energetically. My opponent gives me the opportunity to take the bishop on d7, and I politely reject. Instead, I go to g3. Now there is a rook open down the f-file, the queen is open down the g-file, the bishop's targeting h5, and the bishop on d7 is not really worth my time. I'd much rather play queen g6 and queen f7 mate. So finally, king f8. Now I decide to take. The problem with delaying this capture for too long is that maybe the bishop will slide back here. I don't really want that. Takes. Okay. Material is looking equal. How do we continue to make progress? Let's go bishop e3. There is a possibility here to chop down this knight and then have an opportunity to attack on e5 here. a5, rook b5. For some of these longer games, this game went almost 50 moves. I'm going to cut things just a little bit short because I don't want to spend extra 15-20 minutes of your time kind of just showing you the technique to finish the game. The central focus is using the tactical possibilities in the position to gain a big plus, right? To gain a plus in the position. White is dominating here. Black is not castled. Black's king is stuck on f8, looking straight into the barrel of this rook. So we're going to try to play just a few more moves to see how white locks down a full advantage. Knight a6. So white has an opportunity here to take on a5, but instead white plays the move queen g6. And the queen on g6 is putting pressure on the king further, and now there is an option to play bishop takes h5 in this position. I think there was a motorcycle outside. Queen e8. Trying to trade the queens. Should we trade the queens? No. Why would we do that? Our queen is significantly more powerful than the opponent's. Queen c8. Highly insisting on a queen trade, but this comes at an expense. Queen takes b7, rook takes queen takes c8, rook takes c8, rook takes b7. Now those of you might be saying, wait a second. Levy, what are you doing? There's a knight hanging. Yeah, but you see, rook c3, bishop a6. Levy, what are you doing? There's a bishop hanging. Not quite, my friends. Rook b8 check. Black has to give up the exchange in search of some sort of counterplay, but after a simple move like bishop b5, which actually threatens bishop e8 checkmate, you can see the tactical possibilities in the position. I just want to quickly go back. The opening, bishop d2, launch the pawns. f5 is a different move than you'll see throughout some of these chapters, some of the parts of the first chapter, because f5 is not the most popular move, but just a move that gains space. And we get to a situation where literally, look at this position, my friends. From this point forward, after the move bishop d2, look how every single move white makes progress into the black position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Even bishop e2 is progress. You're going forward. 9, because rook b1 slides the rook over, makes it more useful. c4, rook b4, more progress. Rook takes c4, lateral progress. I mean, castling is progress. Rook b4 is maybe the only move. The only move since like move 5. 12 straight moves, white has made progress into the position. And that move is punctuated, and this whole plan is punctuated by the move knight e6. I really was proud of this game. I thought it was a great game played by white. I mean, it could have been played by me or just about anybody on planet Earth, or Mars for that matter. But white just deliberately plays in the Vaganyan gambit. You have to play with a purpose because you are committing a full pawn in the beginning of the game. So, we begin our journey with knight e6. I will see you all in part 2 of chapter 1 for more fireworks in the Vaganyan gambit.